My name is Nathan Bridgewater, and for 38 years I thought I knew exactly who I was. The middle child of a working-class family in Cleveland, son of a factory worker, a man who did his best to stay kind in a world that didn't give much kindness back. I sent money home every month, showed up for every holiday dinner, and never missed a single phone call from my mother, Dorothy. She was everything to me, the woman who taught me how to survive when my father died and the one I held close during 6 long months of chemotherapy. But on a rainy Tuesday in March, everything I knew about myself shattered. The world I thought I belonged to turned out to be built on a lie. Dorothy was dying in Cleveland General Hospital, her body weak, her breath shallow. I sat by her side, holding her fragile hand, while my brother Dennis scrolled through his phone and my sister Marlene filed her nails in the corner like she was bored at a bus stop. We were there to say goodbye, but it didn't feel like family. It felt like 3 strangers waiting for a train that would only take one of us. Then Dorothy's eyes opened wide, sharper than I'd seen in weeks. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, her bony fingers digging into my skin. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something before I go." Her next words froze the air in the room. "You're not my son." I blinked, thinking she was delirious. But she tightened her grip, her eyes fierce and desperate. "I stole you," she said, the words cracking like lightning. "I stole you from a billionaire's family in 1985. Your real name is Christopher Rothwell. Your father owns half of Manhattan." The room fell silent except for the beeping of the heart monitor. Dennis looked up from his phone. Marlene stopped breathing for a moment. 20 minutes later, Dorothy was gone. And the last words my mother ever spoke left me standing in that cold hospital room, no longer a son but a stranger to my own life. For a long moment after Dorothy's final breath, none of us moved. The steady beep of the heart monitor faded into a flat line, and the nurses came rushing in, but I couldn't hear a thing. I just stared at her still face, trying to make sense of what she'd said. Not my son? Stolen from a billionaire? It sounded insane, like something out of a bad movie. Then Dennis broke the silence. He turned toward me, his jaw tight, eyes burning with anger. "What the hell did she just say?" he demanded. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Before I could answer, he grabbed my shirt and shoved me hard against the wall. The smell of grease from his mechanic's hands filled my nose. "I knew something was off about you," he spat. 38 years of pretending to be our brother, and you didn't even know you weren't one of us." "Dennis, stop," I said, pushing him back. "I didn't know, how could I?" But he was beyond reason. His face turned red, veins bulging in his neck. "You think you're better than us now, huh? You always did. The way you talked, the way you carried yourself. Look at you, our little rich boy who didn't even belong here." Marlene stood up slowly, tossing her nail file into her purse. "You know," she said quietly, "it actually makes sense." Her voice was cold, detached. "Mom always looked at you different. It wasn't love. It was guilt. Guilt." The word hit me harder than Dennis's shove. They didn't wait for the nurses to finish. Before Dorothy's body was even covered, Dennis grabbed my wallet from my jacket. "What are you doing?" I shouted, reaching for it. He grinned, pulling out the cash I'd brought for funeral expenses. "Consider this payment for 38 years of freeloading, you bastard." Security was called soon after. Marlene told them I was harassing the family. "He's not related to us," she said calmly. "Our mother just passed. This man's been living under false pretenses." The guards didn't ask questions. They just walked me out. I stepped into the freezing rain, empty-handed, heart pounding, realizing that in less than an hour, I had lost my mother, my home, and my name. The hospital doors closed behind me, and I stood there in the rain, watching my breath turn to mist. I didn't even have a ride home. Dennis still had my keys, my wallet, and the $300 I'd saved for the funeral. I reached into my pocket. Nothing. Not even a single dollar bill. The parking lot lights flickered, reflecting off puddles like broken glass. I started walking. I don't know how long I walked that night. The cold soaked through my jacket, my shoes squished with every step, and my mind ran in circles. If I wasn't Dorothy's son, then who was I? Every memory I had suddenly felt like a lie. The bedtime stories, the birthdays, the family dinners, it was like they belonged to someone else. By the time I reached my apartment, my landlord was standing outside with a locksmith. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me. "I'm sorry, Nathan," he said quietly. "Your brother called. Said there's a question about your identity. Until it's cleared up, you can't stay here." "Question about my identity?" I repeated, stunned. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "They said you've been living under false papers. I can't take the risk." 10 minutes. That's how long he gave me to pack 38 years of a life. I grabbed what I could: some clothes, my father's old watch, a framed photo of Dorothy holding me as a baby. I stood there staring at it, wondering if even that moment had been fake. When I walked out, the locks were already being changed. I spent that night under a bridge by the river, clutching my backpack, trying to stay warm as wind howled through the city. Days turned into weeks. My bank account was frozen. Dennis must have called them too. I tried explaining my story to people, but who believes a man who says, "My mother kidnapped me from a billionaire family"? They all thought I was crazy. Eventually, I ended up at Burke Lakefront Shelter. It smelled of damp clothes, disinfectant, and hopelessness. I took whatever work I could: cleaning foreclosed houses, moving furniture, loading trucks. Anything that paid in cash. Nathan Bridgewater, the warehouse supervisor, was gone. Now I was just a man with no proof he'd ever existed. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed again. I was standing in the food line at the shelter, holding a scratched plastic tray, waiting for a scoop of watery stew. The man in front of me was arguing about portion sizes, the woman behind me smelled like cheap vodka, and I just kept my head down, trying to disappear. Then I heard someone say my name. "Nathan Bridgewater." I froze. No one here used last names. Slowly I turned around, and saw two men in expensive black suits. They didn't belong in a place like this. Their shoes were polished, their hair slicked back, and they carried themselves like people who had never gone hungry a day in their lives. The older one stepped forward. "Mr. Bridgewater, my name is Roger Blackstone. I'm a private investigator." He handed me a business card with a Manhattan address printed in gold. "This is Anthony Corville, an estate attorney. We've been looking for you." My first thought was that Dennis had sent them. "If this is about money," I said, "I don't have anything left to take." Corville shook his head gently. "It's about your father, Mr. Bridgewater, your biological father." The word hit me like a punch to the chest. "What are you talking about?" Blackstone opened a folder and showed me a document sealed in plastic. "DNA results. We matched your sample from a coffee cup you threw away yesterday. You are Christopher Sterling Rothwell III, son of Sterling Rothwell of Manhattan." I just stared at him. "That's impossible. My mother, Dorothy, she was your kidnapper," Corville said quietly. "Your father has been searching for you since 1985. The shelter went completely silent. Even the volunteers had stopped ladling soup. Blackstone continued, "Your father owns Rothwell Real Estate Holdings, 43 properties across Manhattan, valued at over $2 billion. He's terminally ill and wants to see his son before it's too late." I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Billionaire father? Kidnapping? For years I had been no one. Now they were telling me I was someone I couldn't even imagine being. And then Blackstone said something that made my blood run cold. "There's one more thing you need to know about Dorothy Bridgewater." By the next morning, I was sitting on a private jet headed for New York City, still wearing the same clothes I'd slept in at the shelter. Blackstone had handed me a clean jacket from the hotel gift shop, but even that couldn't stop me from feeling like an imposter. Through the plane window, the world below looked unreal: tiny towns, silver rivers, endless clouds. I couldn't stop wondering if this was all a dream, or maybe a cruel prank. When the jet landed at Teterboro Airport, a black car was waiting. As we drove into Manhattan, I pressed my forehead against the glass, staring at skyscrapers that seemed to touch the clouds. Somewhere down there was my father, the man who had spent nearly 4 decades searching for me. We stopped in front of a tall building on Fifth Avenue. The doorman bowed as we entered, and the elevator opened directly into a marble foyer that looked like a museum. Chandeliers glittered above us. The air smelled faintly of old books and expensive cologne. A nurse in pale blue scrubs appeared. "He's awake," she said softly. "He's been asking for you." My legs felt weak as we entered the study. There, surrounded by city lights and the quiet hum of machines, lay Sterling Rothwell. Even frail and pale, he looked powerful, his jawline sharp, his eyes bright despite the sickness hollowing him out. He turned his head and looked at me. For a second, time seemed to stop. "Christopher," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You have Patricia's eyes." My throat tightened. "Sir, I didn't know what to call him." He solved it by reaching out a trembling hand. "My son," he said simply. The nurse quietly stepped back as I took his hand. It was warm but fragile, his skin paper thin. "I knew you were alive," he said. "Everyone told me you were gone, but a father knows. I searched every year, every lead, every rumor. I just didn't know she was my sister." I blinked. "You're what?" Blackstone's voice was steady but heavy. "Dorothy Bridgewater. Her real name was Dorothy Rothwell. She wasn't just your kidnapper. She was Sterling's half-sister." The room went completely silent. For a long moment I thought I'd misheard him. The hum of the medical machines filled the silence until Sterling's voice, frail but steady, broke through it. "Dorothy was my father's mistake," he said, his eyes glistening with regret. "He had an affair with one of our housekeepers in 1955. When she became pregnant, he paid her to disappear. Dorothy was the result." Blackstone stepped closer, holding a folder. "When her mother died, Dorothy found letters, proof of who her real father was. She came to the Rothwell estate when she turned 18, demanding recognition. Your grandfather gave her $50,000 to go away. He made her sign papers promising never to contact the family again." Sterling coughed, his chest shaking. The nurse moved forward, but he waved her off. "But she didn't go away. She came back under a fake name, got hired as a housekeeper in my home. Patricia, your mother, trusted her completely. Dorothy watched us build our life, watched me inherit the company, watched us raise you. And in her twisted mind, she decided she deserved what I had." Corville opened a worn leather journal. "We found this in Dorothy's apartment in Cleveland," he said. He turned to a page filled with cramped, angry handwriting. She wrote, "Sterling has everything because he was born on the right side of the sheets. His son will inherit billions while my children get nothing. But if I take the boy and raise him as my own, the money will come to me eventually. I'll be his mother. I'll be the one he loves." I felt my stomach turn. "She planned it," I said quietly. "All of it." Sterling nodded weakly. "She waited until we hosted a charity gala. That night she took you from your crib, forged documents, and disappeared. I searched for you for 38 years, Christopher. I never stopped. The FBI gave up, the police gave up, but I never did." Tears blurred my vision. I didn't know whether to feel grief, anger, or guilt. "She raised me," I whispered. "She made me believe she was my mother." Sterling's grip tightened slightly around my hand. "And in some way she was. But what she did wasn't love, it was possession. She wanted my life, not yours." Sterling leaned back against his pillow, his breath shallow but eyes alive with something fierce, not anger but urgency. "Christopher," he whispered, "there's something I need you to do before I go." Blackstone exchanged a glance with Corville, then carefully opened another folder. Inside were thick documents stamped with official seals, a stack of legal papers, and one bound file marked will. Corville slid it toward me. "Your father has already signed everything," he said softly. "As of this moment, you are the sole heir to the Rothwell estate, 43 properties, liquid assets, investments, estimated value $2.4 billion. The air left my lungs. I shook my head, almost laughing. "I can't take that. I don't even know how to live in this world." Sterling smiled weakly. "You don't have to know right now. But you will. I built all this for a family I never got to keep. Now it's yours, not for luxury but for purpose." He reached for a worn journal on his bedside table, Dorothy's. "She wrote something in here," he said, his voice cracking. "Something that still haunts me." He flipped to a page and ran a trembling finger along the words. "She mentioned others. Other women like her. Housekeepers, nannies, women who worked for wealthy families and took their children. She wasn't alone, Christopher. My heart skipped. You mean, there are more like me? Sterling nodded slowly. She hinted at 3 others. Linda, Susan, Marie. She said they were part of a circle. They believed the rich didn't deserve their happiness. They thought they could balance fate by stealing it. He coughed hard, his frail body trembling. The nurse rushed in, but he held up a hand. Find them, he whispered. Find the children they took. Bring them home. I felt tears sting my eyes. I don't know if I can. Sterling's hand squeezed mine with surprising strength. You can, he said, his voice a rasp. You already lived through the worst truth imaginable, and you survived it. Now do what I couldn't. Fix what she broke. A few days later, Sterling Rothwell, my father, died holding my hand. His final words weren't about money, power, or legacy. They were a plea: find them. 2 weeks later, I stood in a cathedral surrounded by people who looked like they'd stepped out of magazines. Men in black suits, women draped in diamonds, reporters whispering near the doors. It was my father's funeral, but it felt more like a royal farewell. The air smelled of lilies and polished wood. Cameras clicked softly as the casket, draped in white roses, was carried down the aisle. I sat in the front row, staring at the coffin, my mind numb. Sterling Rothwell, the man I'd met only days ago, had spent his life searching for me. And when he finally found me, time ran out. He was gone before I even learned how to call him Dad. After the ceremony, as people lined up to offer their condolences, a voice behind me cut through the quiet hum. Brother, it said. I turned. Dennis stood there in an ill-fitting black suit, his hair slicked back, eyes darting around like he didn't belong, because he didn't. Marlene stood beside him, chewing her gum, a cheap purse hanging from her shoulder. What are you doing here? I asked quietly. Dennis spread his hands, forcing a grin. We came to pay our respects. You know, family and all that. Family? I said, my tone flat. You threw me out of the hospital before our mother's body was cold. Marlene's smirk twitched. We were upset. It was a shock. But now that things have settled, maybe we can talk. We didn't mean what we said. I studied their faces, the same faces that had laughed while I stood in the rain with nowhere to go. You didn't mean it? I said softly. You called me a fraud. You stole from me. You left me on the street. Dennis's smile faltered. Look, we all make mistakes, Chris. You've got more money than you can spend in 10 lifetimes. Maybe you could help your brother out. Just a little. 2 security guards began moving closer, sensing tension, but I raised my hand. It's fine, I said. They're not a threat. I stepped closer to Dennis, close enough for him to smell the cologne I'd worn, my father's cologne. You're right, I said quietly. We all make mistakes. Mine was ever thinking you were my family. I turned to leave, pausing only once. Oh, and Dennis, enjoy the ride home. You won't get another one from me. 6 months passed before I finally walked into my father's office, the same room where he'd built his empire. The leather chair still held the faint scent of his cologne, and the skyline outside glittered like a field of diamonds. My name, Christopher Sterling Rothwell III, was now etched on the frosted glass door, but it still felt like I was borrowing someone else's life. Corville stood near the window, a folder in his hands. Everything's finalized, he said. The estate, the company, the trust. You own it all now. I nodded slowly. It doesn't feel real. He hesitated. Most people in your position would be celebrating. But you're different. Because I know what it's like to have nothing, I said quietly. And to be treated like nothing. That night, I sat at my father's old desk, staring at a blank checkbook. The number of zeros didn't matter. What mattered was what I did next. I thought about the shelter, the smell of old coffee and rain-soaked coats, the people who had shared their food when I had none. The next morning, I signed 2 checks for $50,000 each. One to Dennis, one to Marlene. Corville looked horrified when I handed them over. They have no legal claim, he said. After what they did, why give them anything? It's not about them, I replied. It's about me deciding who I want to be. Dennis cashed his check before the ink was dry. Marlene sent hers back, torn into tiny pieces with a note that read, "I hope you choke on your billions." I smiled faintly and had the note framed. It hangs in my private bathroom, a reminder that money can't change who people truly are. A week later I flew back to Cleveland. The sky was gray, the streets wet from rain, but I didn't feel the same kind of cold as before. At Burke Lakefront Shelter, the director, Mrs. Holstead, gasped when she saw me. "Nathan?" she whispered. "Nathan's fine," I said, smiling. "He's the man you helped when he had nothing." When she opened the envelope and saw the check, she started crying. $10 million. Enough to rebuild the shelter, expand it, and keep it running for decades. As I left, I looked up at the cloudy sky. "I kept my promise, Dad," I murmured. "I'll fix what she broke." 3 months later, I stood in front of a glass wall etched with the words "The Patricia Rothwell Foundation." My mother's name, the one I never got to know, now stood for something that mattered. Something good. The boardroom was filled with people who had no idea how personal this mission was for me. At the head of the table sat Roger Blackstone, no longer a private investigator, but the foundation's new director. "We've started digging," he said, opening a folder filled with photographs, maps, and yellowed newspaper clippings. "And Dorothy was right. There are others." He pointed to a page listing names: Linda, Susan, Marie. The same names Dorothy had written in her journal. Between 1980 and 1990, 17 wealthy families reported infants kidnapped and never recovered, he continued. In 12 of those cases, a nanny or housekeeper vanished right after the disappearance. We believe those women worked together. A chill ran through me. "And the children?" I asked. "Most are still missing," he said. "But we've already found one possible match. Detroit, Michigan. A man named Michael Thompson. His DNA is close to a missing child's file from 1986. Michael Pearson, heir to the Pearson Pharmaceuticals fortune." Corville leaned forward. "If this works, it could reopen decades of cold cases." I nodded. "Then it's worth every cent." Within weeks we found him. Michael had grown up thinking he was the son of a truck driver and a waitress. When the truth came out, he was 39. A man who'd spent his whole life wondering why he never felt like he belonged. Watching him reunite with his biological father was like watching time heal in real time. The man sobbed as he hugged the son he thought he'd lost forever. The news spread fast. "Stolen son reunited after 35 years, the headlines read. But for every reunion there were a dozen unsolved stories. Families still searching, children who never knew who they really were. That night, I looked out the window of my penthouse, the city glowing beneath me. "You see this, Dorothy?" I whispered to the dark. "You stole me for money, but I'll use that money to bring them all home." And in that quiet moment, for the first time, I felt like I was living for something more than revenge. Over the next year, the foundation became my entire life. Each morning began with new files, new faces, new names of children who had vanished decades ago. Every case was a piece of a broken puzzle, and I couldn't stop until I found where they fit. We discovered the second child in rural Kentucky. Her name was Jennifer, a 34-year-old nurse who'd grown up believing her mother was a quiet woman named Susan. The truth was harder than any of us expected. Susan wasn't her mother, she was her kidnapper. The DNA results confirmed it. Jennifer's real parents had spent decades searching, holding on to hope long after the world told them to give up. When Jennifer finally met them, the cameras were rolling. The moment she saw her biological mother, she froze, then collapsed into her arms, both of them crying so hard the sound filled the room. "I missed your whole life," her mother sobbed. "But I never stopped loving you." Jennifer whispered something I'll never forget. "Maybe this was the only way for you to find me, by finding others first." Blackstone's team worked around the clock. We traced bank accounts, false IDs, old travel records. Then came the third case, the hardest one yet. A woman named Marie hadn't just taken a child. She'd taken two. Twins. She'd separated them, sold one to a desperate couple in Canada, and kept the other as her own in Phoenix. When we found them, they were 29, living just 300 miles apart, each feeling like something in their life had always been missing. When they stood face to face for the first time, It was like watching two mirrors recognize each other. I remember stepping outside after that reunion, leaning against the car, feeling the cold wind hit my face. That's when it hit me. This was what my father meant when he said, "Fix what she broke." He didn't mean rebuild his company. He meant rebuild the truth. Every child we found was another life Dorothy's lies couldn't destroy. Every reunion was a quiet victory over the kind of pain that had once defined me. And every time a family embraced, I felt a little more like I'd finally found my own. 14 months after my father's death, I got a letter delivered to my office. It was thick, official, and stamped from the Cleveland County Courthouse. For a moment, I thought it might be another case for the foundation, but when I opened it, my stomach sank. Plaintiff, Dennis Bridgewater. Defendant, Christopher Sterling Rothwell III. He was suing me for $50 million. The claim? Emotional damages and psychological distress caused by Dorothy Bridgewater's deception. In other words, he wanted me to pay him for the lies she told. I almost laughed. The audacity of it. The same man who threw me out of the hospital, took my last dollar, and left me sleeping in the streets, now wanted compensation for the pain I didn't even cause. Corville stormed into my office, waving the papers. "He has no case," he said. "Not a shred of legal ground. You weren't responsible for Dorothy's actions. She kidnapped you, not him." "I know," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But let him try." The trial didn't last long. The judge barely let Dennis finish his statement before cutting him off. "Mr. Bridgewater," she said dryly, "you benefited from 38 years of a crime. The defendant is not obligated to fund your greed. Case dismissed with prejudice." Dennis's face turned red as he glared at me from across the courtroom. For a second, I saw the same fury from that hospital hallway, the kind that once terrified me. But now it only made me sad. Outside, reporters swarmed. I walked past them without saying a word. I didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. A few weeks later, Dennis sent letters. Some threatening, some pleading, switching between anger and desperation. I had Corville file a restraining order. After that, the letters stopped. Marlene, on the other hand, simply vanished. Rumors said she'd moved to Florida and told everyone her brother was dead. Maybe, in her own way, she needed to believe that. I didn't hate them anymore. I couldn't. Hate is heavy, and I'd carried it long enough. That night, I took out Dorothy's old photo. The one from my apartment, the one I couldn't throw away. I looked at her eyes and whispered, "You broke everything. But I'm done bleeding for it." Then I put the photo back in the drawer and closed it, for good. In the months that followed, life settled into a strange kind of peace. The chaos had quieted, but the memories hadn't. Every night, before I left the office, I'd glance at the city lights outside my window, the same skyline my father built, the same skyline Dorothy once resented. It always reminded me that the line between love and envy can be paper thin. I still kept Dorothy's photograph in a drawer. Not out of affection, but out of understanding. For years, I hated her, the woman who stole me, lied to me, and destroyed lives for greed. But as time passed, I began to see something else too. She was broken long before she broke anyone else. A woman consumed by what she believed the world owed her. She raised me in poverty, but without her, I would have never understood what it meant to start from nothing. Without her, I wouldn't have learned empathy. Or hunger. Or what it feels like to fight for every inch of progress. Those lessons, as cruel as they were, became the foundation for everything I'm doing now. Sometimes when I visit the shelter, people call me Sir or Mr. Rothwell. I always correct them. "It's Nathan," I say. Because Nathan was the man who learned compassion. Christopher inherited billions, but Nathan earned perspective. One evening, I sat alone in my father's office, the lights dim, the city humming below. I poured a glass of his favorite scotch, the one he never got to share with me, and whispered to the empty room, "You were right, Dad. She wasn't just a thief. She was lost. And maybe I was too." I thought about all the stolen children we had found, 43 so far. Some reunions were joyful, others complicated. Not every family wanted to remember, and not every victim wanted to return. But every case mattered. Every truth mattered. Dorothy stole my future, but she accidentally gave me my purpose. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same fortune she wanted so desperately now fuels the search for every child who vanished like I once did. I no longer saw her as my enemy. Just as a reminder that sometimes evil doesn't come from hate. It comes from emptiness. 2 years after my father's death, the foundation had grown beyond anything I ever imagined. What started as a small team in a single Manhattan office had expanded into 3 countries. We worked with law enforcement, genetic databases, and missing person units around the world. Every month, another child, sometimes now an adult, found their way home. Each story carried its own weight. Some parents had passed away before reunions could happen. Others clung to hope long after logic said to stop. But when the calls came, when a family member answered the phone and heard, "We found them," the silence that followed was worth more than all the money I'd ever inherited. It was the sound of healing. One evening, I attended a reunion in person. A man in his 40s met his biological mother for the first time. He trembled as she hugged him, whispering his baby name over and over through tears. Watching them, I felt something shift in me, a release I didn't know I needed. Maybe this was what my father had wanted for me all along. Not just to rebuild the truth but to rebuild faith in humanity itself. Afterward, as reporters gathered outside, one asked me, "Mr. Rothwell, why do you keep funding this? You've already given more than $100 million away. Don't you ever feel like it's enough?" I smiled, shaking my head. "Enough," I said quietly. "You can't measure enough when it comes to giving people back their lives." Later that night, I walked alone through Central Park, the air cool and still. The city lights glimmered across the pond, and for a moment, I saw my reflection in the water, part Nathan, part Christopher. Both men looking back at each other. Both real. Both scarred. I realized then that I didn't have to choose who I was anymore. I could be both, the man who had nothing and the man who could give everything. The boy stolen for greed and the man who turned that greed into good. The rain began to fall, soft and steady, like it had the day Dorothy died. But this time I didn't see it as grief. It felt like cleansing, as if the past was finally being washed away. Sometimes I still dream of Dorothy. In those dreams, she's sitting at our old kitchen table on Stockton Avenue, the smell of burnt coffee in the air, her eyes distant but familiar. I ask her the same question every time: was it worth it? Was stealing me, living a lie for 38 years, worth losing everything? She never answers. She just stares at me, and for a moment I see it: guilt, regret, and a sadness too deep to name. Then I wake up, and the silence tells me everything I need to know. I've learned that family isn't about who raises you or who shares your blood. It's about who stands beside you when the truth breaks your world apart. Dorothy gave me a childhood filled with struggle, but my father gave me a purpose that outlived both of them. Between them I found balance, the man I was meant to become. The Patricia Rothwell Foundation has now reunited more than 40 families. Some children had been missing for decades. Others were too young to remember being taken. Every reunion reminds me that no lie lasts forever. Truth has a way of finding its way home. I don't live for revenge anymore. I live for redemption, not mine but theirs. For every child who was stolen, for every parent who never stopped searching, for every life Dorothy's greed tried to erase. I still visit my father's grave every year. I bring 2 roses, one for him, one for Patricia, the mother I never met. I tell them both that I'm keeping my promise, that their pain became a reason for others to heal. Before I leave, I always whisper, "We found another one." And somehow I like to think he hears me. I used to think Dorothy's crime defined me. But it didn't. What defined me was what came after. The choice to turn pain into purpose and loss into legacy. My name is Christopher Sterling Rothwell III, but part of me will always be Nathan Bridgewater, the son of a woman who lied to protect herself, and the man who chose to tell the truth to protect others. And maybe, just maybe, that makes all those stolen years mean something after all.